I can hear out A&M finding a lot of success on the offense side of the ball. I expect there to be more points than expected. I think a lot of people are expecting the ugly game that we saw week 1 with College Game Day in town, and I understand why. This is a make or break spot for Notre Dame in their program, especially this season. Knowing how their schedule lines up, where it is Miami, of course, bye week, Texas A&M. Your next major test is going to be USC in the middle of the year. And depending on how USC is, that's not going to be a major quality win if USC fizzles out. It could be a quality win down the line, but that's to be seen. And if you start the year 0-2, and sure, you can still run the table, but that's to be seen, because if USC is good, maybe you lose that one and you end up going 9-3. This is a huge spot for Marcus Freeman. There's more pressure for the Fighting Irish than I would say Texas A&M. Texas A&M still has the entirety of their SEC schedule in front of them. Very similar to last year, where Texas A&M could probably lose this game. It's a quote-unquote quality loss on the road against a very talented Notre Dame team. And it's not going to affect them in their conference race. So what's the game look like? Right? You have one team that's basically working with house money. Of course, A&M has the angle of, well, we want to get revenge, of course, but Notre Dame has all the pressure in the world to win this. And it makes me wonder a couple of questions before I talk about my actual prediction and how I think these are going to be answered. My first one, which everyone has been talking about, has been the rushing defense for Texas A&M versus Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. I believe Price got 6 carries against Miami. Jeremiah Love got 10. I expect maybe even double for both of them. I expect 20 plus touches in whatever fashion it may be for a guy like Jeremiah Love, and Jadarian Price to just be the counterpunch to continuously test and stress out the defense for Texas A&M. It's going to be a stress test because Texas A&M on the defense side of the ball last season, Marcel Reed put them in a lot of positions to win the game against Auburn, the bowl game against USC. There was a lot of moments where Texas A&M had a real opportunity to be in an SEC championship or even win their bowl game if the defense had stepped up. But the defense continuously let out big gains. I think of South Carolina with Lenora Sellers and Raheem Sanders. I think of Auburn. The defense let them down again. And this is going to be their big test because they had given up, I believe it was 24 against UTSA and 22 against Utah State. Now, the Utah State one is a little bit inflated because they pulled their starters relatively early. And then UTSA is a quality group of 5 team in terms of offensive production. They were able to produce a little bit, I believe, against Texas last year. And according to statistics, the number 1 running back in the country in terms of yardage. I'm taking it with a grain of salt. I'm not just going to boost sunshine and rainbows for Texas A&M's defense. It is a question because there's been spurts. There's been moments that their defense had looked really good in their first 2 weeks. But then there's been lapses of judgment. There's been discipline issues, poor run fits, poor tackling. And when you're playing against Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, you can't do that because all of a sudden CJ Carr's life gets easier. I think, honestly, Texas A&M is fully capable, if it does have to go into CJ Carr's hands, they can guard against this wide receiver room that I do think is extremely talented for Notre Dame. But I think A&M is well equipped to handle that. What I don't know if they're well equipped for is the rushing attack, especially knowing they're coming off of a loss to which they didn't use those running backs in the first week. And they have the motivation of they have to make or break at this point. My next question on the flip side would be Texas A&M's wide receivers versus the corners for Notre Dame. Because the problem with Texas A&M last year, outside of Connor Wigman did not play well, he did not look right whatsoever, and the lack of mobility really hindered this offense. You didn't really get to see Le'Veon Moss really come into his own. But also, Ja'Day Walker, no disrespect, I'm glad he made it to the 53-man roster for the Bears. You also have Noah Thomas, who's not a Texas A&M Aggie anymore. He's actually a Bulldog. They weren't really man coverage beaters. And you knew when you play Notre Dame, it was going to be man versus man. You have to beat us, which allowed their front 7 to eat. Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver look like guys that could beat man coverage. And can you stress test the safeties for Notre Dame? Because if you're able to expand the yardage of how far back these safeties have to pull back because of the speed of Casey, Craver, Bethel Roman, and Bussy, if you're able to pull those safeties back or even force them to go into a too high shell, we're looking at a much more efficient rushing attack for Texas A&M. Less people in the box, Marcel Reed, Le'Veon Moss, Ruben Owens, and Amari Daniels. We have not really seen them have their signature game, obviously early into the season, but Texas A&M wasn't really running the football that aggressively against these first two opponents. They've been airing it out, which has been the inverse of what we expected from what I thought was going to be the best rushing attack in the country, and it still can be if they're going to go towards that, identity for the first week of actual competition. In terms of actual predictions, I can hear out A&M finding a lot of success on the offensive side of the ball. I expect there to be more points than expected. I think a lot of people are expecting the ugly game that we saw week 1 with College Game Day in town, and I understand why, because, CJ Carr didn't he looked good against Miami towards the stretch end of the game, but wasn't the greatest look. And then A&M, Marcel Reed, this would be the reintroduction since probably the LSU game for the national public or the more casual fans. I think both sides are going to be able to put up points. What I worry about is if Texas A&M is down late into this game, can they get Notre Dame off the field? That's what I get the most concerned about. Because if you're giving up maybe a 4 or 5 yard run to Love and Price, and they just need to get a first down to make these drives that could have been like 3 minutes into like 5, 6, 7. No pun intended there, but I begin to really worry about that. And I also begin to worry that this is a team coming off of a bye week. They basically strayed away from their identity in their first matchup in a loss. I think they're going to revert back to what they are, which is a ground and pound football team. And they're going to be motivated to prove it against the Texas A&M front seven that has been spotty in the first 2 weeks, has been improved in areas, but still spotty in these moments. I'm going to pick Notre Dame to win this football game. Now it's basic to go with the favorite here, but I don't expect them to cover 7. 7 seems like a lot of points, but I do think Notre Dame ends up beating Texas A&M. Although I do think points are actually going to be scored here and maybe a little bit more than people expect.